Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Good morning, technician Jenny White.
I know I'm getting so mad because I'm looking on Rumble and I've done all of this wackadoo stuff. They say, here, do this to try to put it together. And we've got viewers waiting and it's now saying, guess what? I can't stream to your location.
Yeah, literally like 1 minute before the deal was going. It's funny.
I mean, honestly, I'm about ready to lose my nugget with these people.
You know, I was thinking maybe you should advertise yourself for like commercial services. You could be like one of these contract people that like a corporation would hire you to go work for another corporation. Then all of a sudden, all their technology would just start failing because you're there. You could be like corporate.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Michael. Yeah. Grief. Yeah, so it's not. I mean, we're supposed to be live on the channel, and it's not working. Yeah, and Steph says Rumble always has issues, and I the worst part about it is I keep trying to contact them, and I'll get like an email, and I'll say, "Here's what's happening," and then you never hear from them again.
Yeah.
And so I can't solve the problem when they won't contact me back.
Yeah. Well, the disappointing part was how much of our audience was on Rumble in the past that now can't rely on that anymore.
I know. And I'm trying to figure out, because I don't want to take up Jason's time, but I'm trying to figure out how to edit the streaming code. I'm not kidding. How to edit the streaming code on it to see if maybe that will actually make it work, but you can't. I'd have to pull the whole thing down and do it all over again.
Tech support with Jenny. We need a little segment in the podcast, a little special podcast, tech support with Jenny.
I mean, and our viewers are actually growing out there on Rumble. And so we won't, so now I'm going to have to message all the viewers over there.
Yeah. Well, and we pay for the premium service over there.
That's the part that even makes me madder. Yeah. We pay to get screwed over.
Sound like a good investor, Jenny.
I know. I'm telling you. It's just, I wish it weren't. I mean, and now I've got to figure out how to put in our YouTube channel so I can actually give them a link to go to that. So I'm so sorry, everybody. Good morning. And I'm so glad we have issues with our podcast yet again. So I'm so sorry, everybody. Now you can hear me talking on YouTube as I go out to get the stream. Oh, makes me so mad. Sorry. Hang on, guys. Just 1 second. All right. Sorry, Rumble viewers. You'll have to just tune in on YouTube. So not much I can do about that. What does Robert say? I have Rumble Premium, but still use YouTube. I know. Yeah. And it just makes me upset because I like Rumble and I like the whole idea, of their podcast or their streaming service. I love the idea of that, but they just literally cannot get their act together. And if you contact them and they don't contact you back, what are you going to do?
Yeah. And you want to just not have to rely solely on YouTube all the time.
And here's the crazy, well, I'm not going to get into it because we all really need to hear what Jason Murphy's going to say to us this morning, because it's like yesterday made me mad. Yesterday made me really mad because Governor Stitt fired our friend Kendra Wesson from the board. Explain to me who fires Kendra Wesson. Who fires Kendra Wesson?
I don't know. Was she? I guess she was. I didn't see anything really political from Kendra. Was she asking too many questions that?
Well, I don't know. I just texted with her a little bit yesterday, but I wrote an article about that whole thing because Steph says, because people are angry. Kendra is one of the nicest people I know. She worked extremely hard. Christopher, Steph, and Stephanie Davis agrees it was wrong. Absolutely. So at 1:00, our friend Mary from B1SUT, who has been very engaged in what's going on at the school board, she and I are going to do a live at 1:00 right here, hopefully on Rumble. Knows. But we're going to do a live at 1:00 right here to talk about this, because this is just, it's just not okay.
Yeah.
John says Oklahoma State Capitol, the elected politicians doing this weaponized political stunts thing. It's true. I'm just done with it. And I got so mad yesterday. But here's the biggest, and this segues into our introduction of Jason Murphy, who was a representative in the House of Representatives in Oklahoma. And he is now writing a Substack called the Oklahoma State Capitol. And if you haven't found that, go out to Substack and look for the Oklahoma State Capitol. If you follow my weekly news, like my little news segments that I do for the website, if you follow that, usually Jason has one or even two in my little, I stick them in there so you can find him there. But definitely do that. But we need to segue into Jason, because for all the years that I've been at the Capitol and have been active in legislation on some level, I have never been as confused about a bill as I have been since the beginning of this session. And I don't even want to say confused. I'll just say mad. We showed the video, and I did a live about what Representative Kennedy did to how he bullied, just straight up bullied him, Jim Shaw, new Representative Jim Shaw, on the floor of the House, while Representative Fettgatter just kept shooting down everything Tom Gann had to say.
And they seem to really enjoy it.
Right after that, what?
I said they really seem to enjoy that too. They seem to have like a little smile on their face while they were doing that.
Oh yeah. It was deliberate and it was ugly. But this is what this new House under Kyle Hilbert is like, apparently. So Robert says there was a weird theory I heard that this was staged action to propel Walters to governor. I don't know. It could be, I don't know. Stitt needs to pay more attention to reducing the number of state. Yes, we need to have a whole show about that. So Marvin, don't worry. We'll get on maybe next month. We can do the show on that. Steph says, have meeting with Fettgatter Tuesday over McGirt. Please, you'll need prayer. I can tell you. All right. Well, let's see if we can't bring on Mr. Murphy today and have our conversation with him. Good morning, Mr. Murphy. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well.
So you had an article in your Substack that I'm not sure, but I think it went viral. It was the one where you were talking about what's going on in the House of Representatives. And people are upset about this. They're not happy about what's going on. So kind of give us your hot take on just what's happened so far. And then let's back up and talk about how in the world can anybody follow a bill through the House of Representatives at this point?
Sure. So back in May, I picked up writing, which was something I had done when I was back in the House. up until 2018 and then termed out. And I wanted to share some of the observations of what had happened to House culture in what I call the era of the imperial speakership of Charles McCall. And that was essentially 8 long years by which that speakership had removed the caucus rule on term limits. And that had allowed a leadership team to ensconce themselves for a very long period of time, coupled with the fact that in 2018, they purged the most intellectual, conscientious, conservative members of the House with a pretty vicious dark money campaign. And
that was all created by Chris Kennedy, Representative Chris Kennedy. He even fessed up to it. And this was the same guy who verbally beat up Jim Shaw on the floor on opening day or on organizational day. Sorry, go ahead.
Correct. Kennedy really ended up taking the public, he accepted it in public, probably at a time when there was a sense in the House that those who had executed the purge were in fact heroes. That wasn't the case. It was actually a dastardly thing to do. And I suspect if he could go back in time, he probably wouldn't go take public credit for it. He maybe would have allowed other members of leadership to do that. But that in looking back on what has happened with the House and the culture of the House, that and the imperial speakership created and destroyed the culture, destroyed deliberation, destroyed due process, destroyed transparency. Many of the things that those of us who are what I call the first generation of majority Republicans had consistently worked to achieve. No longer part of the culture was, we've got to get more transparent, we need more due process, we need more open process. But rather it was a consistent, regular darkening of the process, less transparency, less openness, more concentrated power with the speaker. And so as how that affects where we're at now is that that imperial speakership finally, due to the term limits the people of Oklahoma put upon them, they couldn't get around those, pushed that team out the door. And so there's the last half of the second generation of majority Republicans now coming into leadership positions, and their skill set just isn't there. It's disorganized, it's chaotic, it's foolish, it's unwise, it sans good temperament. There's no real understanding of what an open process is, much less a realization that it's even needed. And so as they've advanced their new rules, they've gotten worse. More concentrated power, less transparency. Some items that once May comes and the conference committee reports are rolling out are very disturbing at first glance. And so in what I've been writing and describing has been the imperial speakership, my analysis of that. And frankly, writing once a week, I barely scratched the surface. I could write multiple times a day and not run out of available content. And then 2, my observations of the second half of the second generation majority Republicans, the Hilbert years, which could be as many as 4, what those are looking at, how Hilbert had a unique chance to go back to that first generation mindset that we need a deliberative culture and an open environment. We need to empower the members and diffuse the concentration of power away from the corner office and to the members, and thus the people of Oklahoma by proxy. But he didn't take advantage of that chance. And there's no sense that he even realized that need, because he's been in a culture of atrophy for 8 years. And then in addition to that, now starting to describe the specifics, the mechanics, the tools by which this new generation is foolishly shutting down the voice of the people, as represented, for instance, by Jim Shaw when he tried to open up the rules, or Tom Gann when he tried to open up the rules. They weren't having that, but they didn't squash it in a sophisticated way. Kennedy just grabbed some lawyer craziness off the wall and threw it at the wall. And Fettgatter gave no pretense of deliberation for Gann's proposals, which were those proposals that would have opened up the process. And so that, I think, is the going viral Substack, that post that you're referring to.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
I have a question real quick. when that speakership transfer, when he first came in, like how soon did they really start making all those changes? Was it immediate? Did it kind of take a little while? Was it kind of planned in the beginning to get him in and immediately start transferring that power into that speakership?
So I think you're asking about when McCall first came
Yeah,
in
yeah.
2016. The idea that they had from the get-go was to first and foremost eliminate the caucus's rule that said that the caucus's speaker designee couldn't serve more than 2 terms.
Okay, so you'll have to explain that to people, including to me. Okay, so tell everybody what a caucus is.
Got it. Yes, thank you. So each party has what's called a caucus, and it's sort of like a club that has its own rules. And in the Oklahoma legislature, where so little of it, where there's no open meeting, open records laws that apply, some of our most important laws that are under attack, that's probably a story for another day, but they don't apply to the legislature. And so a lot of meaningful discussion and deliberation, if you can call it that. I think a lot of caucus procedures are somewhat staged. They occur in caucus, which is where the Republicans with their Republican caucus meets behind closed doors. And the idea is their members can ask stupid questions without public ridicule, right? So you can have that side of the deliberative process. Now that's very bad. It's not open government. And in an environment where you have 80-ish Republican members, that's very bad government because it moves a lot of the real process behind those closed doors. But one of the rules that caucus has had, a long-standing rule, which was that their leader couldn't serve more than 2 terms as the leader. That wasn't a House rule. Those are completely separate. It was the caucus rules, which generally aren't made available to the public. And those rules dictate when the elections for the House's speaker designate occur and other positions, the caucus chairman. And in those rules, there was a rule that said no more than 2 terms, which was a very good rule. And it wasn't the biggest deal because up until T.W. Shannon was the speaker in 2013, no one was going to be in that position for longer than the 2 terms because the real term limits would kick in and they weren't going to be allowed to hold their state representative seat. So it wasn't the biggest deal. There was some discussion when Shannon came in that rule should be removed because Shannon would have been eligible to be the speaker, I think, for 6 years. To Shannon's credit, he did not attempt to do that. He served as speaker, and he was going to, had he stayed in the House, going to serve as speaker and then go back in his last 2 years and become a regular member. And that puts a lot of pressure on the speaker because he knows that one day he's going to be a regular member again. But when the speaker doesn't have to worry
and
about that,
when he's a regular member again, then he's under the rules that he's created.
Exactly. That's a great point. When McCall came in, McCall had 8 years left. McCall won far too early. He was an unexpected winner, but he benefited from the discontent that regularly occurs with an existing speaker, usually because that existing speaker has all power, and then that's a curse, really. And so we used to have a pendulum swing constantly where there were 2 factions and the pendulum went back and forth. It actually was a healthy process because conservatives had a voice in both groups. And so one group, maybe they had a key part of the conservative agenda they could get through, and then the pendulum would swing back and our group would have a key part of it. But when McCall came in too early and removed that term limit stipulation as one of his first acts, it undid that dynamic by which there were 2 competing forces that were evenly matched that had to compete for ideas and had to listen to what conservatives said. And because the power of the speaker it encompasses pretty much everything, it's almost impossible to actually unseat a sitting speaker. Right. Traditionally, that process occurred by the pendulum swing once the sitting speaker termed out. But if that sitting speaker isn't ever terming out and he has all power, then the members are always afraid to go against him because he has all of the power.
So let
when that
me
term limit,
insert this really fast before we get too far down the stream here. So John said, and I love the way he wrapped this up with a little bow for you. Caucus, they're nothing but good old boys clubs, and they do favors for each other to get their bills passed while squashing what they don't want all behind closed doors on one of their offices or at a dinner party.
Yep. That was a big part of the imperial speakership, was the absolute defining the caucus mentality. You're with us or against us. You're on the team, you're not on the team.
And I hate to interrupt again, but I think sometimes people don't understand why that's bad.
Yes.
And if you're in government and you're playing the I win, you lose game, right? Which is, we're going to do it my way. And if you push back, then, well, we're just not going to have that. That's not the way good governance functions, because it's not some team. You're not some, and coming out onto the field today is the House of Representatives for the state of Oklahoma. It's not that. You're not a team. In a team, each player plays for the team. In the House of Representatives, each player plays for the people that elected him. That's why this whole notion of, this is good and this is bad, or you're wrong and we're right, or you're against us or you're with us. That's why that is absolutely the worst. It's bad, crappy governance. Sorry, go ahead.
What it essentially does is to put the loyalty of the member, as he or she would perceive it, with a group that isn't the voters, that aren't the voters. So when I elect you as my state representative, I'm electing you in accordance with a contract. And that contract is whatever it was your consultant made up for you to campaign to me. You said you were pro-life, you said you were conservative, you said you were against new regulation, you said you were for cutting taxes, you said you were for transparency. All of that great sounding language that was either a consultant or maybe the consultant's AI. But either way, that was your contract with me, the voter. What I expect, and I will attempt to hold you to is that you're my employee now. In accordance with that contract, I expect you to vote and advocate according to how your consultant said you believed. The minute your loyalty changes from that arrangement with me, your employer, to the team, you're going to vote in accordance with the team, or to the speaker, or to the special interest that paid for you to send that message and to tell me about that contract. Then this is smoke and mirrors and deception. Most legislators find that concept completely alien to them. They don't remember what their consultant wrote on that paper. So they're horse trading, they're casting 1,000 votes a year, and they don't filter it through that mindset. They might go into the caucus, and the caucus takes a secret vote called a whip count. The speaker comes back and tells them what that vote was. They're going to have to take his word for it. And then they're expected to be a team player, make a sacrifice, do it for the team. And sometimes that, from a conservative point of view, can work out. You can have conservative policy advance with the votes of people whose values are very moderate and very liberal because they're playing team ball. But that's still wrong because it betrays those values. It betrays that concept. But that is also used by leadership, or very skillfully used, in my view, by Team McCall to manipulate and control the vote. And that strategy then allows them to do others. You'll notice frequently during the legislative session in about March through May, that open war breaks out between the House, Senate, and governor, even a three-way war sometimes. That's a manipulation tool and a technique. If those dastardly people down on the second floor or across in the Senate chamber are somehow insulting the integrity of the House Republicans, then we have to retaliate against the Senate by not hearing their bills or by doing who knows what. But it's a mind control technique. Once you get that team concept inbred into the members, and the freshmen especially, we take care of each other. We do whatever we can to get our team members reelected, and we'll take care of you too if you'll just be a team player. You won't have to worry, just hit the green button when anything comes to the floor, because nothing comes to the floor unless it's a good thing for the team. And then do as we say, and then we'll make sure you don't lose. You never lose. So you can enjoy the Oklahoma City nightlife with the lobbyist. You can have a war chest that will build up over time and scare away any opponents that might dare run against you. And then you can afford the best consultant to make sure that they tell the voter whatever we think the polls tell us the voter wants to hear. That's the system, that's the scam, and most legislators fall for it. And so the ability of good policy to advance, if it's grassroots driven and not driven by moneyed special interest in that environment, it's hard. The ability for the special interest to move policy in that environment, or the bureaucrats and the state agencies, that's much easier, because those are the people who are giving the money to the speaker's PAC, and that PAC is then giving the money to buy influence with the members themselves, the people in the team. And then the people that get that money are expected to play that game. And that it was really the culture that I think we saw come out of the imperial speakership of Charles McCall. It wasn't one that focused on culture, conservative culture issues, something you could hold them accountable for. It was about concentrating power in the speaker, giving him the ability to wield influence over the team, to ensure that whatever he and or his lieutenants decided was going to move today in the House, that the votes would always be there for it, that few members would ever even know where their no vote button was to vote no. And that's why you will see almost every Republican caucus member voting green in excess of 90-some%. In one case, not mentioning names, but John Pfeiffer last year, I think he voted no 4 times. And that's in about 1,000 votes.
Well, and that was probably a no vote that they wanted. So, I mean, this, so it's like, oh, let's all do a no vote today. You know, I mean, I think the thing that is the part that bothers me personally the most is, I mean, you've known me for a long time. You know, I will debate the wall, and and I will just keep debating until I win. There's no debate down there. There's just literally no debate on anything. Isn't that the whole point of the process? Is that we're deliberative about things? We don't go out and go, we're passing this bill. We say, okay, here, this was brought to us. You know, let's talk about this. What do you think can happen? And I've seen in the 15 years I've been involved, I've seen what ends up happening from the process that you've described, because I've never seen it any other way. And what always ends up coming out is this: we legislate from here. Okay. So whatever happens at the end of our nose is where we legislate. And by that, I mean, because we're not deliberative, because we don't listen to, well, what would happen 10 years down the road if we did this? Well, what would happen next week if we did this? Well, if we did this, we don't have any kind of that process, because it's simply not allowed. I was just watching a committee meeting the other day. Jim Shaw asked one question about a bill, and then basically it just wasn't an open forum. You could feel the room kind of collapse in on itself, like, say, ask one more question. Yeah. Come on, ask one more question. It's absolutely, Denise said a second ago, it's a real problem when legislators favor lobbyists, not the people voters who voted them into office. It's a betrayal. And that is what it is. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Jason? It's a betrayal.
Yep. It's a symptom of bigger government. Once government gets so big, then the special interest will go to that. And then it becomes about the money. And then it becomes about developing a system designed to allow those lobbyists and the bureaucrats inside the government to, in many ways, run the system. The debate that does occur will occur behind the scenes. And you know, maybe if there are competing lobbyist interests, that will get adjudicated in closed offices. What you'll see, and then what you're picking up on, is whatever the determination was behind closed doors, the debate is over now. And so for most members, they realize the futility of public debate because the outcome has already been determined. That's why there are so many green votes. The majority of those caucus members have committed themselves conceptually to whatever the team advances, with very few moments of independence. They do pop up, but for the most part, that's why 90% of the time, if a bill is in committee or a bill is on the House floor, it's going to pass. Then there's a more advanced system for managing when conflicts do arise, and that system is called striking title. And so whenever you see a bill whose title is off, it means that they weren't able to solve it behind closed doors, but they can't quite tell that member or the lobbyist or the bureaucrats who want the bill no just yet. So they're going to toy with them a little bit. They'll let them advance the bill, but it will be in a form that it can never go into law unless it comes back to the House, where there'll be another debate behind closed doors. Either that, or there's an evil scheme by which the people carrying it are just wanting to put it into the end of session and then change it to what they're really intending to do. And the new rules make it easier to do that, I believe. And then sneak something through with just, hours of notice. So there's a whole system set up. There are multiple layers of 4D chess that occur. And the system, by design, especially in the last 10 years or so, has been designed to preserve the status quo by which public discussion and public debate does not happen.
Well, that's what I want to ask, Jason, is how much of that system was actually laid out in, like, as far as the caucus goes and all the rules and procedures and the way it operates now, how much of that was actually like laid out originally in the state constitution, or is it all just come in under the administrative state of all these legislators?
That's a good question.
The Constitution allows the legislature to develop the rules that govern its conduct. Now, it has some basic stipulations. It has what's called the reading requirement, that all bills should be read at length 3 times on 3 separate days. The legislature manages to get around that quite nicely. But it doesn't speak in depth to the rules that the legislators are allowed to govern themselves with. Now, I'll make the point rather forcefully that if we continue at this trajectory, we're seeing a couple of trends emerge. One, the dark money has lost its power. And 2, we're starting to see the balance restore itself for the first time since 2018.
Well, I was going to say, you look at Kevin Wallace, and he had almost $1 million to play for, thanks to lobbyists and special interests. And Jim Shaw beat him. I mean, this is Kevin Stitt's friend and buddy and appropriations chair, Kevin Wallace, and some newcomer to politics who is just sick of the status quo, which is always screwing over the taxpayer, won.
Yes, you saw multiple incumbents lose, and for the appropriations chairman to be beaten in his own district at a time when he was dispensing the pork to that district, and the district still rejected it. That was, for the status quo, a huge warning sign, because if this trend continues, you're going to have deliberative, intellectually curious conservatives once again reflected in the House on a scale that they can hold their own and influence future speakership elections. And so they're the types, the new generation are the types who will be able to understand these concepts. And they have just enough senior members like Tom Gann and Rick West who have been there in the darkest days and can communicate and articulate these matters. And so I'm very optimistic, and I always want to leave that tone in my writings. Now, there are pushbacks to that. Definitely, the system to destroy the Republican Party's ability to control its own primaries is probably the foremost way that the dark money forces are trying to reassert their power. Because once they do that, it becomes more and more about the money as opposed to what has happened now, which is that I think really based on seeing the Mitch McConnell element in Congress has allowed Republican primary voters to say, oh, and it's happening here too. I get it now. Because 10 years ago, Republican incumbent, they must be good. It's not that way anymore because of the Trump McConnell type dynamic. And so all of that is changing. I think there's pushback on that. If they can open up and let liberal Democrats vote in Republican primaries, then they'll make it much harder on us. But then the other element, and back to Michael's question on the Constitution, is I am really encouraged by what I see as the very much expanding grassroots network that wants to be involved. They want to show up at meetings at all levels of government. With a network like that, it potentially allows the grassroots to make it so that the initiative petition is no longer the domain of the special interest left. No longer will it be just George Soros money that puts ballots, questions before the electorate. But you could potentially revisit every element of legislative darkness, from the open records and open meetings for the legislature to legislative compensation, which is far too high, to the concept that the legislature is meeting every year. That's a total waste of money. And then all of the things that we talk about. How do you put in the Constitution a process that mandates the distribution of the concentrated power that right now is concentrated in the corner office and spreads that out amongst the members? We call it the GAN plan because he introduced it in the form of House Resolution 1001 this year, which for the first time put in writing something that the public and the members of the legislature can read and visualize what an open process would actually look like. A process where the legislators have real authority, but real accountability and real responsibility. And if that system, it's tricky putting something like that in the Constitution, but if the grassroots continue to stay engaged and grow, they would have the type of network that could forever transform the legislature, just with a set of constitutional amendments that would almost certainly pass if presented to the public.
Well, and I wanted to point out what darkness buys these people, because I think, we took civics out of schools a long time ago. I mean, that's how I ended up getting my start in the legislature, was trying to stick civics back in schools because I realized we didn't have any civics there. And because we haven't been taught how the legislative process works, but even more than that, why the Constitution of the American Constitution is important and what it does for us as a people in the face of government. And so people now literally expect government to take care of them. And through the process that we have, the darkness only helps people stay in power. It doesn't help the people. And there was a way that I was going to say it a second ago, and it completely, I don't know what happened, but it went away. But the whole bottom line is we have to communicate to voters, to people, to regular people, that they're getting screwed over by this process every single day, that it doesn't benefit them, that it's meant not to benefit them. It's meant to just increase the power of the people who are putting the money into the system. And if you'll go back, those of you who are watching, if you'll go back and see the last couple of articles I've done on the number of tax credits that we have in Oklahoma, for example, I think it will start to really become clear that there's a crony system in Oklahoma. There's a crony system that doesn't want you getting involved because you'll put an end to that. So what better way to do that than to keep you from having to see a deliberative process? And what better way to do that than to keep the legislators from deliberating, right? It's just... Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a smoke and mirrors process, and that's by design, even if the designers didn't necessarily think of it that way. The concepts you and I are talking about here, These are alien concepts to most of the people in that building. The suggestion that they wouldn't be able to have a closed door caucus meeting is absolute heresy. Back in the day, it was a little bit fun to throw out a little heresy in some of those meetings and say, you know, that someday we're going to have to change this. That made no sense, because they absolutely have been preconditioned to view that closed door meeting, which the people can't see, as an absolute necessity. Now, most don't realize a lot of that is just bad theater staged by the people in power. The right people speak up at the right time to just advance that perfect issue just when it needed advance, to give the perception that the caucus is behind it. So the savvy members start to see some of that. And so it's actually a process that the lemmings don't realize necessarily they're playing a certain game. And some of the legislators just aren't the brightest to see through that. And so the end of the day is that it's a bad system, in my view, designed to let the legislators play a game where they can take the maximum amount of money and still give the perception that they're following those values that their consultant had them to campaign on. And that's what the ultimate outcome of that system is.
Okay. So we're at 42 minutes. So here's what I would like to do. I would like to bring in, I'm going to share my screen with you, which is the Oklahoma Legislature homepage. So let me get there just a second and pull that up. Okay. Now, this is kind of the landing page. When you go here, you can find the legislature home, the Senate home, the House home. We don't loft is for another day. So let's just, here's our drop down menu: Senate committee, Senate meeting notices, Senate interim studies, House committee. So I'm going to click on this tab. Okay. And so, oh, it says page cannot be found. So I guess you can't find them from there. I guess you can only find them from here. How can you not find? Oh, there they come. Okay. All right. So let's just go with, okay, here are all House committees: administrative rules, appropriations, and budget. Couldn't now, this one says education oversight. This says commerce and economic development oversight. I couldn't either, even when I was looking the other day, Jason, I couldn't even find the regular common ed committee in this all House committees. Do you see it on here?
Yeah, they've done a hierarchical structure there. So if you'll click on that or hover back over education oversight, you see where it says 2 committees. Go ahead and click there. Scroll down. So there's the oversight. Keep scrolling. Okay. There's the news. Keep scrolling. There are the members of the, air quotes, oversight committee.
That's oversight.
Keep scrolling. Oh boy, and back up.
This is what I noticed the other day, which I was going to ask you about first thing, because they have literally taken, I can't even find the common ed.
It's on the left. Do you see where it says common ed right there?
Oh, now I see it. Okay. Okay, so now it says Common Ed House Committee, Education Oversight, Common Education. Why is Education Oversight before Common Education?
So I think for technical purposes, they didn't want to call these committees and subcommittees. So they called them Oversight and Policy Committees. But essentially, Common Education, if you can think of it in a hierarchical structure, functions like a subcommittee to the Education Oversight Committee.
Which is wrong. So explain to us how it was before.
So in the past, the committee subcommittee structure has only been utilized for the Appropriations Committee and the Appropriations Subcommittees. This invariably was supposed to give the subcommittees certain insights. Usually that's just ignored and bypassed towards the end of session anyway. And then every other policy committee, it was a committee, just like you would have thought, a committee of the House that considers a bill. If they pass it, it's supposed to go to the House floor. If they don't pass it or don't hear it, it doesn't. This year, the new leadership was, as best I've been able to find out, determine, trying to deal with remedying what they thought was an issue during the imperial speakership of Charles McCall. And that was that because all power is vested with the speaker, he appoints someone known as the floor leader who sets the floor agenda. Part of that is giving that person discretion on what to put on the floor agenda. So when the Education Committee passed out a piece of legislation, that floor leader had the authority to single-handedly, notwithstanding the fact that the bill had been passed by committee, kill it. I'm not going to hear it. Obviously, he's going to probably act at the direction of the speaker. That was a reform we fought hard for, and in 2013 we actually wrestled that authority away from that position. They quickly erased that. But the idea is that that floor leader, one person acting on behalf of the speaker, should in no way, shape, or form have the ability to kill a bill that has been approved in committee. At some point, I think in the imperial speakership of Charles McCall, amongst some in the floor leader's office, frustration built at what they saw were the number of pieces of legislation being approved in committee and sent to them for them to take the fall for. And so it meant that in that back room, they got, I think, very aggressive with what was called striking title, which we talked about earlier. Basically, I'm not going to hear it unless we strike title. And then that gave them more control later in the session. But that jams up the activity at the end of the session and makes things very chaotic. So it's always a double-edged sword with these guys whenever you concentrate power like this. And so their solution was, you know, instead of having the floor leader have to be the bad guy and the fall guy, let's disperse part of this authority with 6, maybe 5 oversight committees, and let's spread out this with, you know, an inner core of people that, you know, it's a small group, so they're clearly controllable. Where if a committee chairman gets weak, you know, forwards on a bad bill, forwards on a good bill that he shouldn't have forwarded on according to them, then they have another stopgap, another whole system by which someone else can be the bad guy, can be the fall guy, can filter. And what that disperses is that pressure that every session builds up on the speaker, because he has ultimate power and the smart members know it. He has any number of strategies for creating a perception that he's not the bad guy. But at the end of the day, smart members are going to figure that out. So here's another little thing they can throw at their own members to say, that oversight committee guy, you know, the one that's term limited, that doesn't have to worry about the voters anymore, that guy is whack. I don't know what he's thinking. Should have heard your bill. I told him to hear your bill. He didn't hear your bill, even though a committee, a policy committee, had heard your bill and approved it unanimously. That guy, I'm glad he's leaving. He'll probably be back as a lobbyist a year from now. Remember that when he lobbies you. So that's sort of how the system just got a little more devious, a few more smoke and mirrors, and worse, they sold it to the public as adding deliberation to the process. But I don't think that's what it's about at all. I think what it's about is spreading out the ability of a few people behind closed doors to get that call from the speaker to say, hey, don't hear that bill. We don't want to deal with it. Just take the hit for us. We'll do you a favor later.
Yeah. So, I mean, where's the representation of the people then?
That's not representation for the people at all. It's the smoke and mirror system at that point.
You're just getting things done at that point for the people who come to you and tell you you want to get things done. I mean, I'm looking at, I've got the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development Oversight. And don't get me started on commerce and economic development, because we could be here for another 3 hours and we have another live to do at 1. But there are 5 committees under this one: business, government modernization and technology, insurance, tourism, and transportation. How is it, Jason, do you think that insurance goes on under the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development Oversight?
So likely what they've done by going to this new system is create a logistics nightmare. There was a similar system in the 07 and 08 session, and it was abandoned after that. What they have to come to terms with is this now requires two processes out of what used to be one, which, by the way, just as an aside, favors the special interests and the bureaucracies who can navigate that, punishes the grassroots who don't have the institutional powers to navigate it. But that's just something I needed to throw in there. But what it created was a logistical issue, right? Because the deadlines aren't going to change much, if at all. But now there's double the committee hearings, which, in my view, probably results in less deliberation, because once the committee chairman behind closed doors does the real deliberation, you're just going to have people get us out of this meeting, get us out of this meeting. There's going to be very long oversight agendas. So they maybe would have had to locate the policy committees under the oversight committees, not necessarily based on the subject matter, but based on trying to keep this from being an absolute logistical dumpster fire in terms of the number of bills each oversight committee will get. Now, insurance and commerce have shared a common nexus in the past, I think, but you could certainly make the case that insurance might be in a number of other oversight environments. But you've got to come to terms with the fact that by trying to spread out the pain that goes with concentrated power, created a logistical issue that may not be in line with common sense. And then again, what I get back to is the GAN plan. None of this has to be an issue. That legislature can have independence, freedom. They can have public deliberation and the accountability that goes with it without having to deal with all of this, if they will just go with some of the concepts of openness. One of which, by the way, is that each member should be allowed to designate a certain number of their bills as priority legislation that has to be heard in committee. And if heard and approved in committee, has to be heard on the floor. And if they will do that, all of a sudden that shifts the power, because now it's no longer behind closed doors. It's with the individual member. When Jim Shaw is elected in his district as part of a citizen revolution, and he proposes putting an absolute moratorium on the Biden administration's green energy invasion, he can prioritize that bill and guarantee it a vote and a hearing. And if he does, it's going to pass. But now you see why the smoke and mirrors is so important, because those wind interest, they're still funding the apparatus. And it's very, very hard for leadership to go against that. They'll be in the background, in my view, negotiating something that the wind energy interest can live with in order to save face on this issue. But they're not going to let Jim Shaw's bill be that vehicle unless something really goes wrong. And so the idea that openness and transparency, the GAN plan, would be enacted to those leaders means all that power is gone and all that money has been wasted.
I found I know it's you just want to get so mad because it's
well, it's a typical good old boys club. It's a typical wolves guarding the hen house. I mean, it's just the typical, I don't even, God, it's just so aggravating that we're so removed. I mean, we're so completely removed.
Well, and I was going to mention so the other day I went out and I was looking at the committees because of the fact that I think everybody who watches at this point now knows that I hate this stupid cell phone bill. It's something that they're trying to get in every school in the nation. This isn't just Oklahoma. We're not incubators of ideas or anything, these states. We have legislators going to national meetings with other legislators from other states who all come together and go, oh, let's get all the states to ban cell phones in classrooms. Yay, let's do that. It's the most ridiculous, just another way that representatives and senators and elected officials quit worrying about who's electing them and what they're supposed to be doing at home and what their constituents want. Because, oh my gosh, I got this seat on the state committee, and it's just the coolest thing because I get to hang around with other legislators. And we decided that this cell phone bill is going to be the greatest thing ever. So anyway, I I get so mad. It's like I can't even control myself. So I was looking up the cell phone bill because it passed out of the Senate Ed Committee, big shock because the governor wants it and everybody wants it. So, it's going to have to pass because it doesn't matter what the little people want, big people want it. So it passed and I'm like, okay, so where is it going to go next? Well, I looked at the one from the House and there was a common education oversight meeting, and there were only 2 bills scheduled out of the, I think, 11 bills that they passed in the Common Ed Committee. So it seems to me that's what's going to happen is they pass these bills out of the Common Ed Committee, then all of a sudden then they go to this oversight committee, but, oh, we only have time to hear 2. I mean, doesn't it seem to make some sense there?
So when we get into the game of 4D chess, one of the logistical control mechanisms is, I don't know what the technical term is, but it's putting you up against a hard wall, right? So if I am in that oversight role and I have key things I need the team to be on board with, some hard votes, or maybe not, I exercise maximum control over the members by delaying, by creating the logistical nightmare, because every one of those members has their bills they want, right? Yeah. So they're sitting on, are you going to hear my bill? Are you going to hear my bill? Why haven't you heard my bill? I was sick this week. We canceled the meeting. And so what is that member going to do? They're going to filter everything through. If I make person XYZ mad, I lose my bill. He will not hear it. So guess what I have to do for the next couple of weeks? I have to vote for this guy. And again, the GAN plan solves this. Priority legislation, vote on it on its merits. That whole power game is gone. But if these chairmen can put everything in the last week, then they have maximum control over the members. Now, this is used in multiple contexts. The most infamous one is in almost every session, you will always have a drama built, a scripted drama. Yes. Which is, will the budget be approved or will there be special session that ruins every legislator's God-given right to go on vacation for the entire month of June? And if they vote no on that budget, the crime that they will be committing upon the team by ruining all of their God-given right to have a June vacations will be criminal and they will be ostracized. And so when one of those members back in the day, whenever you actually had budget, there was some debate over whether or not a budget rolled out at the last minute might pass. It was always a game. If the budget was not getting the votes, you look up on the board and you just bet on who caves first. That was, I'll make some observations on that in future writings, I suspect. But the gist of it is, it's a control mechanism to put things late and then leverage control. And it certainly leverages debate. You say there's not a lot of debate. I can't hear your bill because you drug us out for 2 hours participating in that debate. And now we're against the clock and the deadline's coming up. So maybe we'll get to it, maybe we won't. But if we don't, you took up our valuable time debating a bill we all knew was going to pass. Why did you waste our time? Now you're going to have to deal with the consequence. That bill you want is falling off the table because we're out of here, Thursday at 5, no matter what. And so that is something that I would always look for when the inexplicable seems to happen. 8 bills came out of the subcommittee, 2 were heard in oversight. Well, maybe they're going to be controlling it. Maybe that chairman is maximizing their ability to leverage the lobbyist. Yeah, I'm looking at your bill. I know you want it. Oh man, time is running out. Hey, you were helping me organize that fundraiser next summer. I really appreciate that. These are things that happen. And it might not be that clear, but skillful people know how to monetize their power. And so whenever the inexplicable happens, you just have to know that's not inexplicable. Yeah. You have to know how the smoke and mirrors and the money game and the power game work.
Yeah. So there's this was the majority of Oklahomans, and this is, and Tanya, yes, and you can be my friend to help stop this. The majority of Oklahomans comfort themselves in that we're a strong red state and all counties went for Trump. But at the state level, Oklahomans are blind to the evil racket you're describing and keep voting to support this system. And it's just,
Yeah.
it's so true. And Dorn says, I enjoy listening to this guy, Jason, speak. Thank you for educating me on why they don't want us to know and how. And not just why, but how they don't want us to know. And you know, there was a point in time, and you were in the legislature. You remember when Fallon was trying to decide whether or not to take the Medicaid expansion. Remember that?
I sure do.
Yeah, and tons of us were up at the Capitol all the time, going in and out of offices. No, 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 we don't want this. We don't want this. That game was overturned in part, and she had to quit the Medicaid expansion idea because there were so many of us. I mean, you can attest to that. There were so many of us up there all the time inundating those members with, you're not doing this, you're not doing this, here are the reasons why, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it just got to the point where we I guess we just bugged them into submission, you know, and not only the Medicaid expansion, but look at Common Core, because you were there for that whole drama. You know, it took us 3 years, I guess, from the first time a first bill was introduced until 2014, when the bill repealing them from state law was basically passed. That was the first time I figured out what a crock of garbage this whole legislative thing is, because they figured out how, because there was such an outcry, people were like, no, no, we got to stop this. They wanted to make sure that the people felt like they were listening to them and doing something, but they just screwed over that bill to the point there was no teeth in it, and it didn't matter that it was passed or not. And so once it didn't matter that it was passed or not, everybody was like, yeah, we'll vote for it. It's not going to do anything anyway, so we'll vote for it. I mean, it's like you said, it's smoke and mirrors. It's, well, Julia said evil earlier. It's, I mean, there were so many adjectives I guess you could give to it, but I mean, wouldn't you agree that the only way to make this stop is to do what we did during the Medicaid expansion and some of the other times where we've just been, so many of us go to the Capitol and so many of us just inundate our reps that they just can't do anything. They can't play the game.
That's part of it. The other half of that has to be consequences in Republican primaries. So it was hard back when you were doing that, because those of us who could say, hey, I beat a leftist Republican incumbent in a Republican primary to get here, you could have counted us on one hand. But with the dark money losing its power, if we can preserve the current closed Republican primary system, yeah, I really starting to analyze it on where the vulnerabilities to what I call the lemmings group are. And I would say, you know, there's probably a core group that I would call as the core lemmings group. It's about 50 people. And then there are a lot of weak conservatives beyond that vote with them, but will flip when the counter pressure allows them to be courageous. They're in an awful, awful system. Very few people find the courage in that system. So I give them some room for that now. But there are more courageous people than ever before. They need to flip now. They need to do what's right and do it while it's still not popular in that building to do what's right, when it's hard to do what's right. But with those other 50, I think half of them are vulnerable in the primary. Based on various dynamics. So some of them had close calls last time. And the biggest thing you can do, you know, you can't go back and found this nation. You can't put your fortune and your honor and your life on the line to create the greatest republic in the history of the world. with all of our constitutional protections and God-given rights that are supposedly preserved by government, right? But what you can do is you can absolutely start thinking about this now, because you can't wait until next April and be a filing day candidate. You have to start thinking about this now. And feel free to reach out to me, because I can tell you if your guy is a vulnerable candidate or not. And before session closes, just watch those votes through the session. But basically this June, figure out, am I hearing that calling? Because if you will do it selfishly, not for the political power, if you will take the pledge, I call it the abstinence pledge, no lobbyist gift giving, no living the Oklahoma City nightlife. I'm going to be reading the bills and sussing out the bad ones instead of going out and getting hundreds in perks and fine dining. And that Capitol Grill that they brought to town at 50 Penn Place area, that place is going to be crawling with legislators and $150 dinner tabs. Let's give that up. Take that pledge. Don't even take the lobbyist and the PAC money to campaign. Show the voters where your heart is. And that's going to be a sacrifice, because your reputation is going to get hit. Your finances are going to get hit. You're going to have to make incredible sacrifices. But in my view, that's about the closest thing to follow through with. That is about the closest thing, even if you do not win, to being a founding father, to really sacrificing and stepping up for something that is not a pleasant process. It's a true sacrifice if you do it with that mindset. But that's the other half of that, because if you're there lobbying, that's one thing, working and grassroots representing, I would call it. But if then on the other end, you or someone you know is willing to put a year of their life into setting things right, the dynamics suggest it's very achievable. The dark money has lost its power, and it can be done.
Yeah. So Dorn said, we grassroots peepkey, but I think he meant people. Just don't have the financial backing to run. And I kind of think, though, Dorn, even though, I fear Jim spent a little more than he should have because of the war chest of, Kevin Wallace, I do think there have been some grassroots groups that have come up that have literally, they may not even live in the district, but they'll send people out in that district and they'll walk and knock doors for these people that are running. And I think that's the other thing. So you may not feel the call. Maybe you don't feel like this is something that you can do. Okay, that's fine. But you can go walk or knock doors for somebody. You can do that. And you can find a group that's doing that. The South Tulsa Republican Women group, oh my goodness, I think single-handedly group from that group got Wingard elected, and I mean several other because they just get together in a car and they'll go out and they'll walk for people. This, like you said, Jason, I do think that people have started to see through the dark money thing. It's like we said at the beginning, Katrina Avers, who was running for Ward 3 in Oklahoma City Council, Barbara Peck had a bunch of lobbyists and PACs and dark money working with her. And once I published that information and it got out there, people were like, I'm not having that. And she won by 77%. Spending, I think she spent a total of $2,700 or $3,200 to win that seat against lobbyists and PAC money, when I think Barbara Peck had something like, last time I looked, it was like $45,000. So it is a doable thing. We just have to convince people that it is doable. And I think we can. I mean, don't you?
Oh, there's no doubt. And there are examples. I like the one you cited. I can tell you that it's not apples to apples, but it was very similar. If you look at House Districts 32 and 33, both flipped from incumbents to grassroots people that are just holding their own right now. And 32 is obviously Shaw. But if you look at 33, there you had John Talley, a longtime incumbent, very, very liberal representative, did not represent the values of that district. Part of that I used to represent. And he did not represent the values of that district, but he got away playing the game. Yeah, I think all the powers that be wanted to keep him there. His challenger, Molly Jenkins, followed the abstinence plan, no lobbyist. And she, you know, I don't remember what her number was. It might have been 20,000, give or take, something like that. But I think she would have won spending 10. And she got like over 60% of that vote because she executed the plan. And so my advice is do not worry about the money as long as your personal finances are in order and you don't have to go in debt, as long as you can make a time sacrifice without endangering your job. Take care of your family first, of course. Take care of your personal finances first, of course. But if you have a little bit of savings and you have the ability to earn it with sweat equity, visiting with those voters, my usual take is, prepare to put a couple thousand in to get started, and then prepare to spend another 2,000 or 3,000 to just get your base costs covered, and try to raise another 5, and that will come naturally. People will gravitate to you if you're doing the sweat equity and proving that you're doing your part, and then you're in the game. A good grassroots campaign against a lazy incumbent with a bad consultant who's casting a lot of bad votes, $10,000 every time. If it's a hardworking incumbent, or maybe with a great consultant, even if they have bad votes, then let's talk about it, right? We can analyze that. But incumbents get lazy. They have, again, back to God-given rights to political incumbents, once they've been fed by the lobbyist at Capitol Grill, $150 steak dinners, they do not like going out and door knocking with the common folk. And especially when they've cast bad votes and they live in fear that they might actually have to answer a question of a normal person in the real world back in the district who's the contract with that voter. They have been running a scam on that voter. And that voter might be someone who's watching this show right now and now knows what questions to ask. Did you support the GAN plan? Bam, that's just going to explode, because of course they didn't. They played the game. Yeah. And that one question right there keeps them off the doorstep. And so when you have a challenger who puts the time in, builds the relationship, exposes the bad votes, and can put in a little money, you have to put in a little of your own, and can raise a little more. Now you're in you're looking at the Molly Jenkins model. Now, if you're Jim Shaw and you have some business world success that you can put into that as well, you've got to run. That's amazing. But you don't have to be able to independently finance thousands of dollars. The money, as long as that closed primary stays the same, the dark money has lost its power, the lobbyist money is losing its power. We can win in a number of these seats. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you're feeling that call, but definitely don't procrastinate. Let's talk before the end of session, June, something like that, and we can talk that over.
Well, and it's not just running, because I agree with you. We've got to get some good people to run in these. Without Jim, really honestly, without Jim, I think Wallace would have gone. Was there anybody that even ran with him? I don't remember. Maybe one other person. And that is huge. And we do have to focus on that. But the other thing that we have to focus on is what I said before, showing up and just being there in the doorway. I'll never forget the one thing that we did. Julia's going to laugh because she's on this morning. I'll never forget the one thing that we did that made the Senate so mad, because we could not get a Common Core bill even heard in the Senate Education Committee. So, and the what are they? The people who run the Capitol, they have the green jackets and they have what are they called?
The sergeants?
Thank you. The sergeants would never let us come with signs. They were like, you can't have those signs in the building. So one day we just took regular 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. There's a picture of this on our website at the bottom, and it was yellow. And we just wrote, here are the bills on it, and printed up like 500 of them. And I think 120 people came that day and stood in the hallway to the Senate hearing committee room. So it was like the senators had to run a gauntlet to get in there. And it was all of us with our little yellow 8.5 by 11 sheets saying, here are the bills. I mean, that kind of stuff, they don't like that kind of stuff. And it's not fun for them to have to do. And I really honestly believe that if we would just take up some of those tricks that we used back then, again, getting people there, just constantly being underfoot, I think that helps too. I mean, it's just, we're flies in the ointment at that point.
Yep, I agree. I think that is a big component of it. And that part, we talked about those 30 members of the House that they will go conservative if they have the ability to do it. And whenever you're there with those signs, it's making the lives of the special interest people really painful.
Yeah.
But there's this entire group, they just need a support infrastructure. And those are the ones who, especially on close votes, make the difference. If they know they have the grassroots behind them, they're going to vote the right way. Now, they're still casting the procedural votes, the rules votes to enable the smoke and mirrors and the bad system.
Right.
But it's that type of public outcry that gives the realization that this really is important to the people that matter most. They're people in the real world. And so there's a huge importance on that component of it as well.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I kind of had wanted, I'm not joking when I say this either, Jason, I kind of had wanted you to put together a diagram where you showed where here the bill comes in, and then here's where the bill goes, and then the next thing, because now I'm going to have to do that myself. But if you want to do one and then shoot it to me, I appreciate it. So now, we can get it out there.
Are you looking for the way it's supposed to work according to government class?
Or no,
because the smoke and mirrors system?
No, we're going to have to follow the smoke and mirrors one, because that's the only way at this point that we can play the game, right? Just you and me and Michael. That's how we play the game, is by playing their stupid game. We just have to figure out what the rules to the game are. You've told us 100 of them. I mean, but unfortunately, we can't break into caucus and go, you people are idiots, knock it off. I mean, it's not going to happen. So we're going to have to content ourselves with knowing that the bill comes in, the bill goes to this committee, then the bill has to go to that committee, then the bill has to go to the floor leader, then the bill has to go from the floor leader to maybe the floor, right?
Maybe.
Yeah. And then it has to go then if it passes the floor, it may not even get over to the Senate side, right?
Correct. If it passes the House floor, it gets engrossed and sent to the Senate. And then there's a whole nother set of games that are played when that occurs, right? And it's not a diagram, but for what it's worth, that is a huge component of what I'm working on with those Oklahoma State Capitol Substack posts, is really going into that detail in a way that I try to mix in current events so that it's not dry and boring. So that's a little bit of a challenge sometimes, but to entice the reader to stay with me through the 20th paragraph. Yeah. But for those who have an interest along those lines, please follow that and stay with me on that. Even when it gets a little dry, I'll do my best. But one by one, as the issues of the day allow me to, I'm working on bringing these things out and explaining them in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, back up to the first one. I love that one. That one made me happy, Jason, when you just posted in all.
Yeah.
And it's, who was it? Somebody said it and it made me giggle because it's so true. And people have echoed it since then. There are so many legislators down there right now who need to wear NASCAR jackets with the patches of all the people that support them on it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like Nextera, NL. I mean, it's just crazy. And when you have like NL, which is an Italian company, a green energy company, and they're pumping dollars into this too, and you're like, they're not even an Oklahoma company. I mean, why are we doing this?
They're destroying Oklahoma for temporary monetary gain. and they have no long-term interest in the state, but they've already destroyed wide swaths of western Oklahoma. If you drive out on some of those corridors, it is heartbreaking to see what they've done.
Oh, I grew up in Enid, and that was one of the reasons why I gravitated to Denise and Clinton and Denise McIntyre so much. They're out in Garfield County trying to stop this huge solar installation. Well, when I was a kid, I mean, and growing up in Enid, it's really kind of a pretty little town, but it's super flat. And for as long as I lived there, it was just agriculture. I mean, that's where it was, right? And I remember, I think it was the OK2A group in Garfield County that asked me to come out and speak. And I hadn't been out there in some years. And I drove up and I literally, honestly, I cried. I was just in tears. I couldn't make myself quit crying because I thought this is the most horrendously horrible thing. And then when I left, of course, it was dark and I was driving out 55 or 7, whatever and driving back to out east to the to I-35. And all along the way, it was like I was in hell because these little red blinking lights. And I'm like, oh my God, it was, I mean, it's scary and horrifying. And I'm like, and this is true. It's criminal. Oh, and I missed Robert said this when school choice brought to you by Coke and the Waltons. And OCPA. Let's not forget that one. OCPA. And who else? Whole bunch of Bush. Jeb Bush. So yeah. Okay. If you'll stay on with us here just a minute. Jason, if you'll hang in as we close out here, I really need you to help me put together a process map, as Dorn called it. Dorn called it a process map, so we can publish it, and give it out to people so they know exactly where, when the bill starts, where it is, and then how to follow it through the procedure. Because I mean, even as long as I've been doing this, I was absolutely shocked when I went out to look at what I pulled up and we looked at, and I'm like, this doesn't even make any sense. I don't even know where this is going and where that is. So I think I'm probably not the only one that's like that. Fortunately, the Senate is still pretty straightforward. It goes from a committee to the floor leader to the floor, and then, maybe a conference committee, who knows. But the House thing is just an absolute, well, I would use a military term that has an F word I'm not supposed to use in it. But it's awful. And I definitely think, and I've heard from more than one person who says, I don't know how to navigate this. What in the heck is going on? So, anything else before we get off of here today?
How can people reach you? How can people reach you?
Oh, yeah, that's
you need to.
OklahomaStateCapital.com/Substack. And then at any point, just hit reply to one of the posts if they arrive in your email box, and then that will go to me. Again, if you think you're hearing that call, don't wait until the end of the year. We need to talk before the middle of this year.
So just go to your Substack, and then they can reply on your Substack or contact you that way. That's the best way.
Yep, absolutely.
The so-called check and balance on the Republican side is a political joke. Yep, it surely is, John. And Tanya says, thank you, Jason, for your service to Oklahoma in and out of office, a truly ethical voice. All right, well, I'm going to pull you out for just a second, Jason, so we can close out, and then we'll talk more in a minute. But thank you so much for taking the time to be on with us today, because you are definitely a voice that people are gravitating to in order to get truth, because people are understanding that all of this is smoke and mirrors and a bunch of BS. Yep. And they want to know what's actually going on and how to get into the crust of that system. The little outside crust. It's like an M&M. We need to get through that and get into actually making our representatives vote the way we want them to vote and in order to represent us. So thank you so much for that. And we will talk to you. Hopefully we can have you on again to talk about another issue, because you've got so many of them that you can talk on. So just throw us a list of things that you might want to talk about on the podcast, and we'll put something together so that we can get that information out, because we have a nice audience this morning and people are watching. And if they don't watch it live, they catch it later. So
Sure.
let's do that.
I'll look forward to that.
All right. Perfect. Thanks so much, Jason. And we'll talk to you in just a second.
Okay.
That was a great podcast. I think I'm so glad he consented to come on and talk about this, because he's been in the legislature. He understands how this nonsense works. It was just such great information to get from him. And I told you that at 1:00 today, and Mary chimed in here at one point. Mary and I are going to talk about the whole, we're going to kick Kendra Wesson off the school board and rearrange these school board members because of political whatever it was that he said. So we're going to talk about that at 1. So tune back in here again at 1:00. I'll see if I can try to get Rumble to work for that one. And on Friday, we're going to have Robert Keyes back on. Remember Robert, Michael?
With the lawsuit.
Yep, the lawsuit against who?
Well, that was that whole behind closed door deal that just gets me. I mean, unbelievable.
Yep. So Robert Keyes in his suit against the election board for trying to make them follow the law, which I don't know if you heard about something like that before. I don't heard anything about that. So we'll have him on Friday to talk about where his lawsuit is. And you'll want to tune in for that, because I think, again, you're going to find out that we're not really a red state. And the only way to fix that is you. So we'll see you again at 1:00. Anything else before we get off of here this morning?
Well, yeah, just one real quick thing. Just listening to all that with Jason, it's just so eye-opening, because I don't think anyone really has, the general public, the general, people of Oklahoma, they have no idea that that's how these things operate at the Capitol. But it reminded me, Jenny, come all the way down to our local, to city council and to like your school board. They literally do the same thing, but in executive session. They go into hiding. They make all these decisions. They do all this stuff. And then they come out and, it's so bad.
It's true. But again, who is going to push transparency? It's not going to be our government. Our government who's pushing against transparency isn't going to do that. Our government isn't going to save us. We are the only people, because it's our government. So when you get frustrated and you get upset about this, the only thing you have to do, again, as I always say, point fingers, I mean, we've got to be the ones that stand up and say, we're not doing this anymore. But you're exactly correct about that. So, all right. Well, everybody, it was good to have you on. Thank you so much. Be safe today. Julia pointed out that it was snowing in Yukon. It's snowing here. It's snowing and it's very yicky. So be safe when you get out, if you've got to get out. And otherwise, we'll see you back here, you don't have to get out to do that. So meet us back here at 1, and then we'll see you again on Friday at 9 a.m. Thanks so much for being with us. Bye.